Hi y'all, welcome back to my channel. This is the Survivor's Guide to Life. My name is Jessica Lang and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. In today's topic, I am going to dive deep into the DSM, PTSD, and what does that all mean for you. So stay tuned. Hi y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you are new to this channel, welcome. Thanks for joining. This channel is the Survivor's Guide to Life, and it's all about trauma, the brain, and how you can heal. It also connects other mental health topics. Focus is mainly on trauma and trauma-related symptoms. So if this is your kind of thing, then go ahead and click that subscribe button so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And while you're at it, head on over to Instagram and go ahead and follow me. I'm trying to get to that magical 10K so I can get that swipe up feature. And I also post a lot of inspirational quotes and pictures and some day-to-day kind of life so you can get to know me a little bit better. So be a part of the community, subscribe to the channel here, and also follow me on Instagram. So without further ado, let's dive into it. For the past couple videos, I have been diving pretty deep into the brain, talking about the stress response system, talking about how the brain develops. But one of the things I haven't really focused on is what exactly is PTSD or complex trauma. What does that look like? Well, that's where we're going to turn to the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is the DSM-5. It's the latest version of the DSM here in 2019 when I'm doing this video. And inside this book, as you can see, my beautiful tabs are every mental health diagnosis under the sun. So when people make comments about, oh, I'm OCD because I like to clean a lot, say, oh, I'm bipolar because they have emotions, which, you know, make you human. Anyway, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, those type of diagnoses are here in the DSM, and this is what we use as therapists, as mental health professionals, when somebody comes in and they're telling us what's going on in their life and they have some symptoms. We basically match the symptoms to the criteria. So I thought that it might be interesting if I actually went through the DSM, went through specifically the trauma-related disorder category and focused on PTSD and how somebody qualifies for the PTSD diagnosis, and then also dive in a little bit more, just kind of how that actually feels in your body, and then a couple of tips on what you can do if you think you have PTSD or you have already been diagnosed with PTSD. So the first thing you'll notice in the DSM, right? So everything has a category. So it's trauma and stress related disorders. So this is where you're going to find anything related to PTSD, anything related to kind of trauma symptoms is going to be under this heading. Let's see. So as you'll go through, for example, like you'll see reactive attachment disorder, which I could talk about more. I see that a lot with kids who have extensive trauma histories, and so they typically have been bounced around between different caregivers, so in and out of different foster care systems, maybe group homes. Oftentimes they'll get that reactive attachment disorder diagnosis, and again, I can talk more about that because I've seen that quite frequently in my career, but we're focusing today on PTSD because you all know I'm a rambler, and if I get off topic, I'll be talking about everything else. So let me see. So here it is. Here is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So as you can see with PTSD, there's a lot that is written here on who meets the qualifications of PTSD. Forgive my notes. I don't know why I wrote notes on it. So this is our, 1 page, 2 page, 3, 4. Yeah, it's a lot. Before I dive into post-traumatic stress disorder specifically, many folks who have experienced multiple traumas a mental health professional might tell them, you have complex trauma. Now, complex trauma is not, even though folks really fought hard for it to be put in the DSM, it's not currently in this version of the DSM. But we will still say you have complex trauma because it encompasses so much more than like what's standard for PTSD. And I feel like most professionals who work with trauma survivors, we know just how intense the symptoms are, and like it's not based off of one experience, it's multiple experiences that get you that complex trauma, as well as like the symptoms that occur as well as the symptoms that are like causing you distress. So not DSM-5 diagnosis that's in the book, but you can still say, okay, I have complex trauma. I'm just gonna read a couple items here, and as I'm reading it, maybe think, does this sound like something you've experienced? Maybe somebody you know. I'm only gonna read a couple because I don't want to bore you. So the following criteria apply to adults, adolescents, and children older than 6 years old. For children 6 years and younger, see the corresponding criteria below. So we have Part A, exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violation in one or more of the following ways. So then they list 4 different ways. Part B, presence of one or more of the following intrusion, why wouldn't I say intrusive symptoms? Sorry, intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic event, beginning after the traumatic event occurred, right? Again, they list about 5. Number 6, persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with traumatic events, beginning after the traumatic event occurred. Okay, as evidenced by one or both of the following. I won't read it again because this is very long. Negative alterations in cognitions and moods associated with the traumatic event, beginning or worsening after the traumatic event occurred, as evidenced by 2 or more of the following. E, marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic events, beginning or worsening after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by 2 or more of the following. Duration of the disturbance, criterion A, B, C, D, E, which I read before, one of the ones I read previous to this, that has been going on for more than a month. The disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. This G is in almost every single DSM diagnosis, whether it's depression, anxiety, that one is almost always there. So it has to be causing you distress. Our part of your life has to be affected negatively by these symptoms. So that's what they mean when they like break it down. So either in your personal life, maybe at work, maybe interactions with friends, like it doesn't matter, but it basically causes you, it's causing you problems. The disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or other medical condition. So that's something that's really important to know is in the DSM, when somebody's abusing substances or they have a medical condition, the substance abuse, whether they're going through withdrawal or they're currently intoxicated, it can affect the person's mental capacities, and it can mimic some of these symptoms. And the same with like a medical condition. Also within this category, with post-traumatic stress, with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, they also added specifically PTSD for children under 6, and they wrote out separate symptoms. So in the DSM-4, they had it all lumped together, and sometimes you would miss some of the PTSD symptoms in children because they didn't mimic what was going on for adults. So I'm going to read the part for kids, and then I'm going to be done because I could just read on and on and on. Children 6 years and younger, exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. So they list 3 ways here. I actually think I'm going to read this. Directly experiencing the traumatic event, that's 1. 2, witnessing in person the event as occurred to others, especially primary caregivers. So no, witnessing does not include events that are witnessed only in electronic media, television, movies, or pictures. So like porn, or somebody dying on TV. And number 3, learning the traumatic events occurred to a parent or caregiving figure. So that's I feel like that's really important. Oftentimes parents have their own trauma histories, and so maybe in a way of like trying to protect their children, they overshare, and that can actually cause distress in their child. So that's, one reason that they put that there is like, we have also what's called vicarious trauma. So like if you're repeatedly hearing about somebody else's trauma, you can start to have similar symptoms because you are hearing about somebody else's pain and like what they're going through. A lot of people in the healing professions like other therapists, crisis support workers, nurses, etc., have vicarious trauma because they deal with trauma every day. So in this one, it's talking specifically about children and children hearing about their parents. I just want to make a note that they note it specifically for kids, as like something that could be causing something that could cause them distress that maybe you as a parent wouldn't think about, because you're just, again, you're doing what's best for your child by sharing and trying to protect them, but by sharing too much, you're actually causing them a lot of distress. B, presence of one or more of the following intrusion, I don't know why that word is bothering me, intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic event beginning after the traumatic event occurred, right? So you're talking about recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic event. So, it has five symptoms that are under that category. Then you have category C, part C, one or more of the following symptoms representing either persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event or negative alterations in cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic events. Must be present beginning after the event, or worsening after the event or events. So these include persistent avoidance of stimuli, so they don't want to be reminded, obviously, of like what the trigger was or what the trauma was. And then negative alterations in cognitions. So this typically can be like a fear state. This can also be some self-esteem stuff. They might be more withdrawn. That all goes in that category. And then category D, alterations in arousal or reactivity associated with traumatic events, beginning or worsening after the traumatic event occurred, as evidenced by two or more of the following. So I'm going to go over this a little bit more later when I do subsequent videos, where I'm going to talk about how sometimes PTSD is not diagnosed, and what's diagnosed instead is like ADHD or another generalized anxiety disorder. Mostly I see ADHD though. So it's typically ADHD or like a bipolar disorder, or you can also get borderline. So I'll cover those a little bit more later. But when you're looking through this, and when I'm working with my clients, you'll see kids who are really hyperactive or they're really irritable, and because some of these things overlap in other mental health disorders, oftentimes they get missed, and the trauma isn't recognized, especially in kids. The hard part also is that we often think of trauma as something that's like a really big event, and we sometimes miss some of those little ones. Like if you live in an environment where there's a lot of violence, I spoke about this before, like your stress response system is going to be heightened, and it's going to be activated regularly because there's gun violence, or people are getting assaulted regularly, or whatever's going on. Like you see that every day, and even though you grow up in that environment as a child, that's still very scary. So your stress response system is constantly being activated, and what happens, it becomes sensitized. So your baseline shifts, and now like you're just constantly on edge and you're keyed up, and that looks like ADHD because you're looking around like this. Like that's hypervigilance, right? You're scanning your environment, trying to see where the threats are, how you can protect yourself. That's the difference between somebody who has ADHD who cannot control like the impulses, like the brain wiring is different. It's not trauma based, or it's not hypervigilance. But if you don't take an accurate trauma history, or you don't take into account the environment the person's living in, you might miss that. So again, I'm going to talk about that later. So that's the DSM. That's how you get a PTSD diagnosis. So not everyone who's experienced a trauma or multiple traumas will develop PTSD. So I just want to make that clear. Just because you've experienced a trauma or had trauma in your life doesn't mean that you are going to have PTSD. And that's part of the reason why I read the symptoms, was to show you like how invasive it is in somebody's life, and how serious the diagnosis is, and why therapy and really taking care of yourself is so important. And so being able to slow down and stop that process is really, really important. So what can you do if you think you have PTSD, or you have been given a PTSD diagnosis? Tip number 1, find a qualified licensed professional. A licensed social worker, a licensed marriage and family therapist like I am, a licensed psychologist, a licensed professional counselor, sorry, I almost forgot them. Any one of those people is technically qualified to work with you and your PTSD diagnosis. But I'm going to urge you to go further, right? Make sure when you're interviewing this person that they actually have experience and specialized training in working with somebody who's experienced trauma. whether it's multiple trauma, single incident trauma, it doesn't matter. It's very specialized, and you need somebody who really knows what they're doing. Tip number 2 is to learn some grounding techniques so you can slowly bring your cortex online. Again, with PTSD, you have that sensitized system, right? That sensitized stress response system because of the trauma. And one of the things that happens is you get triggered, and immediately the top part of your brain shuts down, and you're in the limbic system, you're in the brain stem, right? You're just reacting. Your brain does this for survival, and it needed it, right? When you're experiencing that trauma and the tough childhood, etc. But when you're at work and your boss is, maybe criticizing you about your performance, that's not the time for the stress response system to kick in and shut down your cortex, right? So being able to use grounding techniques so that you can have that cortex come online, and you're not just you don't run away, or you start arguing with your boss and being aggressive and combative because fight now is kicked in, or you don't want to freeze, feel like you're paralyzed, right? And then kick yourself later, like, well, why didn't I say this, or why didn't I defend myself about that? And then you start that spiral of shame and self-loathing. So learning grounding techniques so you can give your cortex enough time to get back online and do its job is fundamental. Tip number 3, identify your triggers. Oftentimes, if you slow down enough, even though it's really scary and it can be frightening to kind of confront things that trigger you, taking that moment to figure out what is a trigger for you, so you can make action steps to kind of limit your interactions, or learn how you can breathe through it, or learn how to manage your symptoms if you're in an environment where you're going to be triggered and you can't really help it. Like, again, it's your boss who maybe yells, and yelling triggers you. You could talk to your boss about, can you talk to me like this, that, and the other, but that might be really scary. So, being able to identify that, okay, your boss yelling is going to be a trigger, and so these are the steps I need to take, if I hear my boss yelling, so I'm not triggered and go into my trauma response. Tip number 4 is to use affirmations and self-compassion tools to build your self-esteem. Many folks who've experienced trauma have difficulty with their self-esteem and self-loathing, a lot of blame and shame. If that's something you're struggling with, then find ways to implement self-compassion and affirmations in your daily life to build your self-esteem. Finally, number 5, find different ways, physical ways, to get that pent-up trauma energy out. So whether that's jogging, or doing kickboxing, or walking, yoga, part of the problem, especially with the freeze response, is that it gets trapped, right? The trauma is trapped and stored in your body, and the completion of the stress response system never really happened. And so being able to fully release that energy can help move you through the processing and the healing of your trauma. So that's all I have for you. Please let me know your thoughts on this video by commenting down below. Is there anything that I read in the DSM that surprised you about PTSD? Is there anything that you want me to talk about more, maybe in later videos about trauma? Let me know, comment below. I'll do my best to make it happen. If you or someone you know is struggling because of trauma, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional. I really think that's, I listed it as tip number 1 for a reason. It's so important and so valuable to the healing process, and it really does work. If you are in the California area and you're looking for a therapist, feel free to contact me. I have a couple spaces open, so you can head over to my website and you can just schedule your intake online. The information's in the description box below. I'd be glad to talk with you and get to know your story, and it won't be on YouTube, don't worry. That's all I have for you all today. Thanks so much for your time, and I will see you tomorrow.